Hello again, this is Mrs. Politsky, and these are notes for Government, Chapter 2, Section 4. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Constitutional Convention and the ratification of the Constitution. So as we go along, you should have a handout for Section 4, and we're also going to take some additional notes that you'll need to put somewhere within a notebook or a piece of loose leaf paper. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the people and the groups that helped influence the Constitutional Convention. And we're going to just go through some of these names here. You guys are all familiar with George Washington. He was the commander of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. He presided over this Constitutional Convention and was selected the first president of the United States as a result of that. Our good friend Benjamin Franklin, very old statesman by this time, played an active role in the debates, and this is basically one of his last public events that he participated in before he passed away. Gouverneur Morris, he wrote the final draft of the Constitution. James Madison, who is known as the father of the Constitution, this is a man from Virginia. He authored the Basic Plan of Government. William Patterson, he was the leader of the small states. Small states are states that had very small populations and also were kind of small in size. Uh, he offered what is known as the New Jersey Plan, which we're going to look at here in a little bit. Roger Sherman, he helped draft the Connecticut Compromise, aka the Great Compromise. Some of our groups, the Federalists, these are people who were in favor of ratification of a new constitution. What they wanted was a strong national government opposed to what we had under the Articles of Confederation. Our anti-federalist group, these were people who were opposed to the Constitution. They feared a strong national government would hurt the states, and they kind of wanted to keep the Articles, but in time, uh, many of them would come on board to favor the Constitution as long as we added a Bill of Rights to that. Alexander Hamilton, he was a Federalist. He authored many articles in support of the Constitution, as well as a man named John Jay. He was author of what is known as the Federalist, which is a collection of many essays that supported the Constitution. Hamilton and Madison and John Jay wrote many of these articles. All right, so let's talk a little bit about our Federalist and Anti-Federalist. And I mentioned before Alexander Hamilton and John Jay and James Madison were all those people who kind of favored the ratification of this new Constitution. But there were a handful of these individuals who did not want to see it. Probably most noted, Thomas Jefferson, Samuel Adams, Richard Henry Lee, and Patrick Henry, noted for give me liberty or give me death. So, Federalist. They favored the ratification of the Constitution. They favored a powerful federal government. They argued that a Bill of Rights wasn't really necessary because the federal government was already limited. Our anti-federalists, they didn't want to ratify that Constitution. They wanted a weak federal government, not to threaten the states' rights. But they also thought that a Bill of Rights was needed to protect the rights of the people. You know, in a way, both groups were kind of right. So, one of the things that we know is that because of our division between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, in time, what we're going to have is kind of the birth of what I would call political parties. And we really can kind of go back to this whole debate over the Constitution for bringing that to the forefront. All right, so to get this Constitution off the ground, so to speak, we had some different plans. And we're going to talk about the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan here in a moment, and then some of the different compromises that came out of these two groups. The Virginia plan is sometimes known as the large state plan, and it featured basically these 5 items. 3 branches of government opposed to the one that we had under the Articles. You had a legislative branch that would be bicameral opposed to unicameral. In other words, we have 2 houses. You have an upper house, elected by the people, or a lower house elected by the people, and an upper house that was selected by members of the lower house. You have a Congress that would choose an executive branch. In other words, your Congress would choose your president. You had executive and judicial branches that could veto acts of Congress. And finally, it was a lot easier to amend or change than the Articles of Confederation. Our New Jersey plan, aka the small state plan, featured the following: 3 branches of government, that should look familiar, a unicameral, kind of staying in the same tradition as the Articles of Confederation. Also staying in that same vein, each state would receive 1 vote in Congress. And the people from the small states, they wanted to kind of be on the same playing field as our larger populated states. They would have an executive branch that would consist of more than just one person. So it would kind of resemble maybe a little bit of an oligarchy. And then finally, you'd have a judicial branch that would be chosen by Congress, unlike what we have today. So let's talk about some of the different compromises to kind of soothe over some of the hard feelings between the large and the small states. We have what is known as the Connecticut Compromise, aka the Great Compromise. And what the Connecticut Compromise did is it modified the Virginia plan by providing for a legislative branch with a House of Representatives based on the population and a Senate that would have 2 representatives from each state. Originally, our Senate would be chosen by members of the House of Representatives. That would change after we ratified a new amendment to the Constitution that would allow the people to vote. There was also a 3/5 compromise because determining population was a huge concern, especially among some of our Northerners. Southern representatives wanted to include slaves in the count for population, but Northerners were concerned that that might give the South an unfair population advantage. And so they proposed what is known as the 3/5 compromise. And the 3/5 compromise would solve this problem. Okay, slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person in determining representation in the House of Representatives. Okay, along with that, we had the adoption of the Commerce and Slave Trade Compromises. Delegates agreed not to ban slave trade until 1808. After that period of time, you would not be able to import slaves into the United States. Also, no export tax would be levied as well to kind of keep everybody happy. All right, moving onward. To ratify the Constitution, we had to have a couple things. Okay, it was sent to Congress, or Congress sent it to the states in September of 1787. Delaware was the first state to ratify it. 9 were needed to ratify, and they eventually got that by 1788. The states of New York and Virginia did not approve due to their size, and part of that is they thought that they were not going to be given a fair share of the power and authority in this country as a result of some of the compromises. All right, I hope you got everything written down.